and I whispered in her ear the sinner's prayer. But 2 nights later, I get a phone call from the facility that says, your wife's feeding tube has fallen out. I go down there and I walk in the room and I look, and the feeding tube is in her hand. I said, I'm not signing the paper. And they said, you realize what's going to happen? And I said, 100%. She's going to be dead in 7 days. But she's ready to go now, and I'm ready for her to leave.
Hey everybody, before we jump into today's episode, we'd like to recognize all those who make this podcast possible. The Lead Today show is supported by all the generous donors of the Lead Today community. Thank you so much for investing in shaping leaders through this podcast. And be sure to like and subscribe on whatever platform you are watching or listening today. All right, let's jump into the podcast.
David, good to see you again, and welcome on to my podcast, the Today Counts Show. I haven't seen you, I think, since we had kind of dinner together in that one gathering, but prior to that, we had a fun Mexican food lunch. So good to see you. How are you doing?
Good to see you today too, as well. And I just want to thank you, one, that you would invite me to this podcast. You don't know you're a tailor until somebody calls you a tailor. And so when somebody asks me to come do something, I'm like, well, maybe I do. Maybe I might have something inside me that other people might cherish or glean from.
Well,
So
you
thank you.
do. Right. Yeah. I mean, I invited you on this show because I think our listeners are going to be very interested in your story. Um, and I just found you to be a very attractive personality that people can relate to. So we're going to kind of weave through your story, Dave, and you know the first big part that you shared with me over some Mexican food was your life of drugs and drug abuse. And I think that you said it was in the San Jose area. Is that right? Tell us a little bit
Yes.
about maybe, you growing up. How did you get messed up with drugs, and what was that all about?
So I started dabbling in drugs probably in my high school years. I and it was just marijuana from time to time, drinking a lot uh, from the age of 12. I've always had a job and always had money in my pocket, and so you know I remember coming home on Fridays after I'd get paid, and two things I had to take care of was one, pay rent to the house that I was living in, and the other was set aside some money for my drinking for the weekend. I never missed school. I graduated high school, but it was the lifestyle that started out there followed me forward into, so that was around 12, 13 years of age, followed me into my up until I was 35. uh, Towards the end there was a 750 bottle of Canadian Club, 18 pack of beer, every drug I could stick in my system, um, partying constantly, never missed work. Therefore, I didn't have any problems. Um, my driver's license down in California, I have that memorized to this date because I, I had myself convinced that I could drive around loaded, and if I could recite that, the cops would leave me alone and knew I was sober enough to drive. Kind of a stupid thing to do, but it is what it is. It's my life. That was the lifestyle that I was embedded in. Always an entrepreneurial, so I was making money uh, illegally as well as legally. We had a little storefront down there in the retail sector, and I made more money out the back door than I did the front door. So it was just lucrative for me.
Now let's go back to this 12-year-old David Rich. Uh, isn't it typically true that a 12-year-old who gets a whiff of beer they don't like it, right? That's usually kids when they first experiment with it, unless it's peer pressure or whatever, their first experience is like, oh, this stuff is horrible.
Yeah.
What connected you with alcohol as a 12-year-old kid?
So I had a stepfather back then that we would go fishing, and he would give me beer, and while we were out on the lake or whatever, and I think as a 12-year-old young man, you're always trying to please that elder father figure in your life, and so you begin to do those things, um, thinking that you're getting you're getting loved out of it. You're getting your ego is probably being stroked a little bit. Your big headedness comes into that. Oh, I'm a man now at 12 years old because my dad, the person I look to as being my father figure, is welcoming me into this lifestyle, uh, which I look back today, and that's the farthest thing from the truth. That was not what he was doing at all. He was probably uh, grooming me to be on his side of some pretty terrible things that happened in our life, in our family, during that time frame.
Yeah, so
So
almost like a cultural rite of passage, type of a thing. It sounds like whether he even knew it, he was just doing what he knew, and you were a convenient uh, participant, follower, in his life. But it stuck. I mean, you said that you were heavily into it, and other drugs you began to add up to the age of 35. What were you doing from high school to 35? I mean, you mentioned that you had a storefront. Well, what was that storefront? You had the front door business and you had the back door business. I think we're figuring out what the back door business is. You built some margin into some of your recreational, if you can call it that, activities.
yep.
But what did you do from high school to the age of 35?
So from high school to the age of 35, I was working during high school. I was working three jobs. I would work early in the morning before school. I would work um, after school. I had a job to do on the way home, and then I would go to a gas station and work until 11 o'clock at night, which afforded me, you know, meeting people of all different sectors. Um, in that, I ended up, as I turned 18, I believe, when I was working for a grocery store um, down there. It was a family owned business, and I ended up marrying the daughter of the owner of the store, um, and that was at around the age of 20. And we had um, a great relationship. I was still partying, she was partying, um, but then I started thinking about having children, and she was really happy being. She loved Disneyland. She loved being out into the party lifestyle, and she didn't want any part of having any children. And I remember we were about 10 years into the marriage. I had said to her, if you're not going to give me kids, I will find somebody that will. And that 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 statement there uh, moved her into an area that she would give me kids. Um, Unbeknownst to me, what laid ahead of that, I would have never said that. Um, she we ended up getting pregnant. She went 9 months, 2 weeks, um, with a uh, with a full term baby, 2 weeks past due. She went into labor at our house that night. Drugs were not involved at that point in her. Uh, and as she is going into labor, she starts screaming as her vitals, her internal vital organs were shutting down. And I'm on the phone with 911. I've got the ambulance coming. It seemed like an eternity. They get there, we get her to the hospital, and the doctor came out. Uh, and so I was probably right around 28 years old at that point. And the doctor came out from the emergency room into the lobby and said to me, he says, the baby is deceased, and we need to know what you want us to do with your wife. Well, at 28 years of age, and I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, do you want her alive or dead? That was the option that he gave me. And I was like, I want her alive. And he said, okay. And so he goes in the back, puts her on life support. Well, that was not something she would have wanted. I didn't know the answer I didn't know what he was asking me at that point. So she goes on life support, and then her family gets involved in it and everything. And there was a lot of animosity during that 7 years that she ended up in a coma for 7 years. During that time frame, her family sued me in court for properties that they had put in her name for convenience sake. They wanted me to sign them over. They wanted me to divorce her. Even back then, I didn't know Jesus. I didn't know the relationship. I knew there was a creator, but I had a very high belief system inside me. And I said, for better or worse, in sickness or in health. And that meant something to me. Even in all of my mess, that meant something to me. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. And so they sue me in court for it. The judge, I'll never forget this. She listened to the opening arguments, that's what you want to call them, on their side. And then she recessed for lunch and called me and my attorney into the back and said, what the heck have you done to this family? And I said, nothing. I've done nothing. I says, they want stuff back from me to be signed back. I'm not going to do that. Um, I says, I don't want that property. I don't want any of it. I will sign it back to them when she passes away, but I don't know what the future holds for her. And I want to make sure I can financially take care of her. So the judge said, what do you do from here? And I said, I'm headed for Washington State, and I'm gonna go up there. My family's up there, and I'm gonna take her with me and just get out of here. And so she says, I'm gonna recess this till Monday. You go home, because I'd already packed a motor home ready to go. And she says, you get out of here. And I'll tell them on Monday that I'm throwing it out of court. And so I got up into Washington State with my mom. And I'm getting a little off track here, I think, as far as we're still talking about high school. Uh,
No, I think you're, yeah. Let's continue at least with the story of your wife.
okay, so I get up here. We get up here, and so I'm the caregiver for her, um, which opens up a brand new door to me for free drugs, basically, because all I got to do is pick up the phone and call the doctor. She's in pain. They call in a prescription for liquid codeine into the pharmacy, and
So
that's
is she sometimes conscious during this 7 years,
no
or?
no
Oh,
100% incapacitated.
okay.
No verbal, no nothing. Uh, I mean, it was um, it was a prison that I woke up and found myself in. And so I'm numbing all of that with the drugs and the alcohol and just getting deeper and deeper into it. Um, at one point,
How old were you when you moved to Washington State?
I was 20, let's see, probably 32.
Okay,
32.
32.
It,
And
it,
and was she at home under
yep.
your care, or at a institution?
No, she was at home under my care, because it's at one point, the insurance is like, we're not paying for this no more. There's nothing on the other end of this.
Was she
You need
still
to
at
you
work?
have Yeah, but there's no progress.
Right.
And And so you have to take her home at this point. And they paid for, I think they paid for like 2 shifts of nursing care so that I could still work because that's where my insurance was coming from. And then I'd come home from work, and that was 7 days a week. That's what I did. I had zero life. Um, at one point,
So Dave, I don't help me with one thing. I'm not very knowledgeable on this. So these years that she is comatose, initially she was put on life support. Is she still on life support, or somehow alive without life support but comatose?
so she's alive without. So there's different levels
Without
of.
a lung machine?
Yeah, so there's no breathing machine, um, but there is a feeding tube that's inside her. So you have to feed her liquids 3 times a day, and so there's different levels of life support. I guess is what I'm saying. Uh, I learned more about medicine during those 7 years than I would have ever thought I knew. I could take care of her with my eyes closed. I knew what was going on when, blood sugars would be high, what to do with that, all of this stuff that just constantly. I've got such a respect for people I find out that are a caregiver today because it's a prison. And you love that person with all your heart, and you're going to do anything and everything you can to see it through.
How did you, I mean, you have a very interesting story already, right? I mean, you struggle with, it sounds like you're a functional alcoholic. You're also doing drugs, but you're working your tail off. I don't always see that. I mean, in fact, I don't know that I see that too often. Where having, I mean, I suppose there are men and women that are killing it in the business world while at home, their marriage is shipwrecked, or maybe they're closet drinkers, or I'm sure there's a lot of that going on. And yes, I've run into that, but you take the medicating yourself, as you were speaking of, and I guess that's the answer to the question I was going to ask. How were you coping, through all of this, the fight with the in-laws? um, your wife is there, but she's not. Um, and you mentioned earlier that there seemed to be some principles that you still had a conscience that was intact, where there's right and wrong principles. You made a promise, so that was very active. Maybe you've already answered the question, but um, is there anything else that you would add to it, of how did you cope through all, and how many years was she in this state, and how did it
She
end?
she was in the state for 7 years. So let me answer the first question. The coping um, is, I believe it's Aretha Franklin that I heard this song that she did called "You Were There During All the Pain and Glory." The
Mm.
first night, the first time I ever had a conversation with God was day probably 76 of a 180-day stay in an ICU unit. It wasn't in the day, it was at night. And it was ugly. It was ugly. I, I, I started having this conversation with him, and I says, and you're the God that loves me that people have told me about. How is it that I am here dealing with this now with all of this love that everybody has told, these people have told me you have for me? If if I don't see that, if I don't get to see a glimpse of that, a glimpse of light at the end of this tunnel, I'm going to turn into the ugliest heroin addict you've ever seen. That was my conversation with him, with a lot of explicits inside of it.
Yeah,
Um,
it
and
was on,
I
it was honest though.
what's that?
It was honest though, right? I mean,
Oh, 100%. It
yeah,
was honest. It was what I was feeling. I, um, I but I think the coping mechanism was that right there that day. Even though I didn't invite him into my heart, he looked at me and he says, "Son, you're where you need to be right now." Um, because there were times when I literally had planned to take my life during that time frame, and the drugs is what helped me. I passed out. I had it all set, ready to go, but I passed out. Woke up the next day to a changed feeling, and I think that interaction that night in that hospital room was was the beginning of the relationship that he wanted from me.
Our situations are different, but they're similar. I was walking down a hospital hallway having a very authentic, non-religious, if you will, conversation with God about my 9-year-old son, who the doctor said had days, if not hours, to live. And a lot of people, um, there's a lot of people who've just never been to that low, that pit, that place, and a lot of people have. I want to come back to your faith in a minute, but I'm wondering if also, because you're an entrepreneur millionaire. You don't have to work today. You don't work for a paycheck today. So you're very successful man by your own um, efforts. And I can't help but wonder if some of that, I mean, you're kind of like a mosaic. You're- let me just, I think we have I know our relationship is new and fresh, but I think I hear your heart. Slap me virtually if I'm wrong, but I kind of feel like you're a mosaic of life. You're you've got father wounds for
Mhm.
sure. You you've had a past of addiction to alcohol and drugs. You liked this gal that you met. You partied together. You got married. You guys got to a chasm, and now the listeners are understanding what you meant by if I knew what the ultimatum that I gave my wife would have led to, I would have just sucked it up, and realized something different. And no, there's no way you could have known that. But now you've got tragedy that you're facing, that you have already experienced the loss of your child, tragedy that you are living, coping, really negative coping that you are doing, but you're also building business. And I'm wondering if the business drive was also part of your coping mechanisms to survive, because you just left off with thoughts of suicide.
Yeah. So
What,
a
what,
mosaic. uh, I what's that?
well, yeah. And so the other part of the mosaic, right, is that you're successful in business. So
Yeah.
before we dive back into your faith, which is really what I want to talk about, um, give us a little bit of a tour of, so what kind of an entrepreneur are you? What I'm guessing you're mosaic in that as well, but but tell us a little bit, about your business journey.
So the mosaic, you're spot on. And you know what? I cherish that mosaic. I
Yeah.
cherish it. I, I, I wouldn't change anything in my past. Even knowing what I know today, I wouldn't change anything in my past. It's what made me who I am today. It, I, I wrote a book here a couple years ago, and what we just talked about, the the ghostwriter that I had didn't want to put that in the book. She says it's too ugly for this book. And I said to her, I says, that can't not be in the book. It's got to be in the beginning of the book because it gives me credibility to the people that are going to read this. They're going to read this and they're going to see, because you can walk up to somebody with a silver spoon in their mouth and say you don't have a clue as to how you got that. I have a clue how I got where I am today, and I'm thankful for it. I Silicon Valley was just taking off down there in San Jose when I had my retail storefront, and I'm buying memory chips from some guy that was taking them illicitly from the company that he worked for, and I'm paying him $2 and I'm selling them for 20. I'm an entrepreneurial. I can make money out of mud if I need to. It's just finding out what the need is and filling it. Um, I, I coming out of all of that and coming up here to Washington State, um, is what. So the coping was my work as well down there, because I never missed a day of work. I would there. I worked for a big retail grocery chain down there in California. I would show up drunk to work, and I ran the night crew. The manager would look at me and say, I got to get out of here. I can't be a part of this. And he'd leave me there. Never call me out on it. I mean, there were people, I think back to all the people that crutched me up, that held me up and allowed me to stay in that mess. I never got a DUI. Never. I never got in an accident. I'm so thankful that I never hurt anybody during that time frame. I got in an accident when I hit Washington State, and I ran a stop sign and I was
Mm,
drunk.
mm.
The officer never took his helmet off of his head. He wrote me a ticket for running a stop sign, and that night, um, was the night that I guess I formally gave my heart to Christ on the
Hmm.
living room floor of my mom's house. Nobody led me there but him, and it. I'll never forget that. I feel like God protected me through all of that time for such a time as this, for such a time as being able to be in the church today and be a significant contributor to the church today.
That's good. I think you also told me over some fajitas that some of your business activities included like convenience store slash gas station
Yep.
uh, type of network. So you must have learned a lot about real estate in that, because also what you're doing now for your church, as I understand it, is you're helping them grow their footprint through multi-site um, campuses, which
Yep.
requires somebody that's out there, that is either finding buildings, finding land. And I think you told me that you found a piece of land and you subdivided it so that the proceeds from part of it can pay for, what the church would have. I mean, it's obvious that you have this entrepreneurial spirit. We do want to talk about your book, so don't let us forget to talk about your book. But let's talk about this alcoholic drug guy. How did how, when did your wife finally let go? When was she? How talk about that real quick. Um,
So in 1996, um, I I had met, um, I guess, came to terms with the fact that I needed to move on in my life. I'm still drinking. Drugs are not as much, but I'm still drinking at that point. Um, And so I had moved my wife into a facility that was close by. I could get to her whenever I wanted to, and I'd still go by and see her. But I was beginning to start a new life for me. There was nothing on that side of it. Um, and through that time, I got to know my current wife, Terry, and she introduced me to church. And I'm in church, and I'm not knowing if what I did that night in my mom's living room was the same thing as what the pastor's asking me to do now by raising your hand. So I'm thinking, well, it can't hurt. I'm gonna do it. If I was wrong there, I'm gonna be right here. And so I gave my heart to Christ in the church, and I went that night to see my wife, because I'd always stop there on my way home. Um, and I told her about the experience that I had at church and saying the sinner's prayer and giving my heart to Christ. And I says, honey, they tell me you can hear me, and they tell me that you're aware. So I want to lead you in this center prayer. They say I can do that, that we can all reach out to people and we can do that. And so I grabbed her hand and I whispered in her ear the sinner's prayer. I didn't get any response from her. I didn't get like a squeezed hand or eyes pop open and say thank you or anything. She's just laid there. But 2 nights later, I get a phone call from the facility that says, your wife's feeding tube has fallen out. You need to come down here and sign some paperwork for us to put it back. Life support again. This is 7 years into her being, I mean, almost to the day, 7 years. I go down there and I walk in the room and I look, and the feeding tube is in her hand, clenched in her hand. And I looked at the nurse. I says, has anybody touched this? And she said, nope, that's the way we found it. And I said, I'm not signing the paper. And they said, you realize what's going to happen? And I said, 100%. She's going to be dead in 7 days. But she's ready to go now. And I'm ready for her to leave. And I went about my day, went back home. And 7 days later, she passed away. Sent her body down to California, and back to her family down there, and they had a service down there for her. But that was the beginning of the end of that old lifestyle and the beginning of a new lifestyle for me.
Hey everyone, we're going to take a brief break from the podcast to let you know our very own Jim Piper has released a brand new book called Story, The Art of Learning from Your Past. Everyone has a past, but not everyone learns from it. Jim unpacks lessons in this book that help leaders and learners understand the potential our past has to impact our present and our future. Be sure to grab your copy of Story where books are sold. All right, let's get back to the podcast.
Throughout life, I figured out that I have a very high futuristic, competitive belief, activator, and significance are my 5 strengths. It's a lot of squirrels to be running around up inside this head, but those have served me well in life. On the other side of life, where there was darkness, and on this side of life, where there's light. I'm so thankful for the church. I I, I love the church. Um, it's what has really refined who I am as a person. I didn't, Champion Center, I've been here for 27 years. Um, I didn't know that you get upset at the pastor and you just leave and go to another church. I didn't know that was a thing. And I'm thankful for that because it's kept me rooted here where God has called me to. And I think that comes out of one of my strengths of being of belief. We're all called to serve God in some capacity or another. And at a church, and not every church is for everybody, and not everybody is for every church. This is my church. I love my church, and I love what God has done with me inside this church. So being able to, when I sold off, so we have built 5 beautiful properties up. We have 5 different LLCs that we own, and we manage those. They all had businesses on them. We were able to sell off all of the businesses to people that we kept the land and they leased the land back from us. So that's our income stream. And Pastor Kevin asked me one day, he said, I had one business left. And he said, what are you going to do when you sell that last business? I said, you know what, Pastor, that scares the fire out of me, because from the age of 12 years old, I had a job. I had a place to go
Mhm.
to work. I said, I'm
Yeah.
going to wake up Monday morning at the age of 60 and not have a place to go. And he says, when you get done, you come see me. I have an opportunity for you. And so we got done with that, and I met with him, and he says, I want you to lead up our campus expansion. I want you to just run with that and keep us moving. Um, and so I said to him, I said, Pastor, two conditions. So now I'm negotiating with my pastor, the man that is now my father, spiritual father, and which again I didn't know that you weren't supposed to do stuff like that. And he's like, two things. I said, yeah. And he said, what are they? And I said, well, one, I don't get a paycheck because I love you and I love our church way too much for that. I said, I will serve you like an employee. I will do everything I can to make this position great, but I don't get a paycheck. I said, the second thing is I get to baptize the first individual that gets baptized in any new campus that we open. And he says, you got a deal. So, and so far we've done that. And there's a young lady named
there's a
Alexi that was my first one. My first paycheck was Alexi.
there's a lot of things we could continue to talk about on what you just mentioned. I mean, for one, we do live in a culture that is easily offended. We live in a culture that when things don't go your way, you take your toys and go home. So I think you're a wonderful example of why that's not necessary. I'm not sure how we got here to where that a disagreement or a disappointment is a legitimate reason to walk away from a relationship, an organization, what have you. But it seems as though God had placed that in you from the very beginning, going back to the statement that you made in your wedding vows, your marriage vows, and till death, do us part. So, um, uh, you, Dave, your story is very very special, and being that we've been together, physically, I can tell that everything that you have said is very genuine to you. You've become a man of honor, a man of generosity, a man who, um, seems to be what, in my mind, is a follower of Christ. Um, uh, when you described that day that you fell on your knees at home, and then when you're at the church and now becoming part of the local church, um, um, what does your how would you describe this followership that you have for Jesus? How do you see yourself um, in relationship with God? What Why does God know you? Who are you to Christ? Who is Christ to you? How would you explain that to the everyday person about your faith relationship?
So the I sat in services um, week after week, year after year, and hearing about how we're supposed to serve the church. Um, all I heard about was the parking lot, the kids ministry, the band, all of these things that you see internally that makes the church operate. Um, and I would feel guilty because I wasn't doing any of that. But I could write a check and be generous with it. Um, but just writing the check wasn't. I'm still confused in my head because I'm not serving physically in these different areas. And so I was sitting down in the barn one day, and I'm having this conversation that you just asked me about with God. I'm just sitting down there, and I'm like, and he's like, "Son, what did I call you for?" I said, "That's simple. You call me to create finances for your kingdom." Wrong. I'm like, "What do you mean wrong?" Yeah, No, Matt, I've been saying that for years. You've called me to create finances for your kingdom. Wrong. And all of a sudden, the scripture fell in my head when he sat down with the disciples and said, "Go forward and move the gospel forward." And I was like, "Okay, I've been called to move the gospel forward, but I've been created with multiple talents to do that with. I haven't been created to be a drummer. God knows I haven't been created to be a singer. I haven't been created to change diapers. I haven't been created to move out in the parking lot, but I have been created with a talent to give extravagantly into the church and help the church move forward." Um, that day when I had that conversation and I realized the purpose of me in the church was that I can serve in any ministry I want to now in the church without, I mean, if there's a void in the parking lot, I could be in the parking lot. If there's a void down in kids, I've rocked babies. I haven't been on stage yet. I don't think they trust me enough to be up on the stage singing or something. That wouldn't be good. But I say that to say I get to now still have my purpose in church and have fun doing other things. We have youth camp for a whole week up in the mountains. I'm there from the beginning to the end of youth camp. I sleep in my camper and I have so much fun with those kids up there. I love it. And having a church that supports you and a pastor that supports you in a way that it's fulfilling. It's 100% fulfilling. And knowing that God, I've got this thing that I've been in my heart here the last, just probably the last 30 days, that when, if you're having Christmas dinner and you've got a roast in the oven and you've got 2 o'clock dinner and that roast is not temping out to be ready at 2 o'clock, you turn the heat up. And without giving any glory to the adversary, his days are numbered and he knows it. And he's turning the heat up. He's turning the heat up on our churches. He's turning the heat up on our business people. He's turning the heat up on our children. And how much more should we not be fighting at this point for that? Because we're going to win, no doubt about that. And I feel like this is the part that I've been kind of toying around with in my head. He has looked for churches with good soil to plant finances in. And I think because times are getting closer and time is rapidly evolving, he is now looking at people, not just businessmen and women, but people that have proven themselves to be good stewards with finances and that he can begin to give to them knowing that they're going to give to the church and knowing that they're going to give to move that gospel forward and get those people in, get them baptized, get them saved, and move them on down the road. It's times are short, and we need to know that. We need to respond to that because it's a joy for me. It is an absolute joy.
Yeah, one of my scripted questions I was going to ask you is, so why do you love the local church so much? But I think you just answered that in the ways that you have. I think I will also add, though, that Dave, you're the kind of person that if you weren't receiving all of those things that you've talked about that you have received, you're a giver, and that just comes through loud and clear. You also wrote a book. Tell us about the title of the book and what the book is about and where we can get a copy of that book.
So I just conveniently have one here with me, and I
So
don't know.
if,
Is
if
it?
you're watching this, if you're just listening, you can see it by going to the YouTube channel and seeing the book. Beautiful cover. Go ahead, Dave.
So it's called "You Were Meant to Climb."
Yeah.
by Dave Rich. It's on Amazon, and you could type in on the search bar either one of those, Dave Rich or You Were Meant to Climb. Um, and the purpose of this book, for me, our pastor had called me and my wife into the office a while back and said, he was taking an organization, teamchurch.org, um, to its own organization. It was a conference that we had in our church for many years, and he had asked that if we were giving, if we had some giving arms that we could give to this new org. He didn't want us pulling anything from the church. He wanted to find somewhere else. So this was my find somewhere else that I was able to go out and create another income stream with that, um, and get to go out and encourage other team churches in ways of legacy and giving and that kind of stuff, which is what the book was intended to do from the very beginning.
Yeah, and I think that the refreshing message, that you're talking about is we are blessed beyond uh, even our own understanding, and living a life of generosity is a life giving and a life receiving proposition. We don't do it to receive, but it is what happens when the heart has been set free. It's what faith does. Faith gives birth to so many things. It gives birth to wisdom, to courage, to temperance, to justice. And the New Testament added three others: faith, hope, and love. I mean, those are the character attributes that we can capture in our lives, and it all seems to be sparked by faith. They're all
Yep.
interdependent with one another, but it seems to be sparked by faith. Um, well, Dave, I have been looking forward to this talk, and I'm so glad that you were able to join me. I told my wife Rhonda, after we had Mexican food that day, I said, shoot, I wish I would have known him before this lunch, because we would have arranged this podcast in our studio in person while you were here. But you had a pretty busy schedule. You had to go up to College Station and visit a friend
Yep.
up there, as well as serve us at the banquet that we have. So we will make sure that the title of your book and where to get it will be in the show notes. And again, Dave, thank you for sharing a little bit of your life with us. What a wonderful mosaic of God's grace.
Let me end with two things, real quick. A statement my wife came up with is it's time to invest in the things that we cannot lose
Mm,
instead of holding on to the things that we cannot keep.
mm.
And then this other statement in the back of my book: we go together, not alone. We are undivided. We let the best idea win. We abandon smallness. We are undeterred by offense. We starts with me. We move the church forward. We are Team Church.
Mm. That's good. I mean, the one that really stuck out is it's time to invest in the things that we cannot lose versus
Yeah,
invest in the things that we cannot keep.
yeah.
Um, that's very, very good. Very good stuff. So when are we going to see each other again? That's a question we could talk about offline.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll run. I'm sure we'll run into each other. I know that to be a fact. We're all in this together. We're all breathing the same air, so we're going to cross paths, I'm sure. And I know me and Terry thoroughly enjoyed ourselves down there in San Antonio, and it was really a good time.
We'll say hi to Terry for us and have a great day. Thanks, Dave.
All right, thank you. Have a great day yourself.
Thank you for joining us here at the Today Count Show. Be sure to like and subscribe on whatever platform you listen or watch so you don't miss any content. And stay tuned for more coming soon.